Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. So today's video is on a topic that I have thought about for a long time and that I have thought was a bit silly for a long time, but which I never thought to make a video about, which is strange as someone who makes videos about transit like all the time. Today's video is about Spadina Station on the Go RER network, as I like to call it. I don't think Go expansion is a very good name, and that probably deserves its own video, like naming transit systems and why in Toronto our plan with Go is not that great, at least at the moment. But this video, again, is about Spadina Station in downtown Toronto on the Go network, why it's really problematic, and why it might be a symptom of a much larger and more concerning problem. Let's get into it. So I want to preface everything I'm going to talk about today with, I don't know what the current plans are. Plans seem to come and go really quickly, and one day it's this plan, the next day it's this plan, like with the whole beach layover thing on the Lakeshore West line on the Go network. Like, basically plans seem to live and die very quickly. And so I'm not sure what the current plan with Spadina Station is, with Smart Track and with the whole developers are going to fund stations and all the various stuff that's happened with stations. I'm not sure if it's being built or what the deal is, but as far as I know, the last time I checked, Spadina Station on Go RER, or let's just say Spadina Station on Toronto's S-Bahn network that we're building, was going to be a station on the north side of the rail corridor. I'm sure we'll have a map on the screen or something. That was basically where the yard is on the western end of downtown Toronto that stores Go trains for the midday period before they go back out east. And basically they were going to take some of the space from that yard, convert it to a station, and it was going to be bippity boppity boo, we've got a great new transit station for you, and we've solved the problem. Spadina now has a Go station, Western Toronto's served by Go now, we win, we did it, it's great. There's a huge number of problems with this whole Spadina Station plan though, and I hope it doesn't get built as it's been planned. People say I'm never critical of like plans that involve Go RER. Not true. This is definitely a case where I'll be very critical. So as I mentioned, the current plan is to have the station at the north end of the corridor, which should raise red flags immediately if you're aware of how these sort of large S-Bahn type networks operate. Basically, with Spadina Station located on the north side of the rail corridor, it does not span the rail corridor, which we'll talk about a bit later. The station would just kind of come off, I think, of the bridge which Spadina takes over the rail corridor, and then allow you to access the platform, which I believe would just be as like a single island. Because of the fact that it's just a single platform, maybe two platforms, it would only be serving the Go Barrie line, which on a map I guess seems fine. Like, oh, we have a station at Spadina, you can take a train to Spadina, easy peasy, it's great, right? But no, that's not the case. And I think this gets into a lot of other issues we have with our transit planning that I will discuss in further videos. But suffice to say, in a large transit network, having a station that exists where many lines operate but only a few lines stop should be cause for concern. Now, to be clear, there are cases where you have like an express station, right, where you have only local trains stop. But usually that sort of station serves a smaller area, right? Like a local community that would, for example, like to get some train service, but it doesn't really make sense to stop all of the commuters who are traveling on the corridor at this station because it would be super inefficient. Spadina is not one of those stations. Spadina Station is set to be at the western end of the downtown of one of Canada's and North America's largest business and financial centers, and frankly, a lot of people live in downtown Toronto. So this is not some minor community. What does that mean? Well, having trains of only a single line stopping at Spadina really doesn't make sense. Now, there are cases where sometimes you might have trains which bypass a major station because for purposes of speed or whatnot, but they should definitely not be the majority. So red flags are already raised that most trains will not even be stopping at this station. Now, to put this further, if you kind of consider how you imagine Spadina Station would be used, you'll find there's a lot more issues with this whole station's use if it's only on the Go Barrie line. For us to actually see what the problems with Spadina Station are, we need to consider how you would actually use the station. So let's talk about someone departing from the station first. If you're departing from Spadina Station, you might be coming from some location either in City Place, farther north on Spadina, or even the western end of the downtown core. Let's not forget the massive well development is going on literally north of the rail yard I was referring to earlier that Spadina Station is being built in. It's going to contain a ton of offices. I believe Shopify is going to have offices, etc. So you're kind of seeing that office development is already like in this area. I know a lot of tech companies are already located around kind of Chinatown, Spadina area, and so there's a ton of people who like live and work in this area. The idea that this is like a minor area is a little silly, especially when you consider rail stations last a long time. What it looks like now is irrelevant. If you're anywhere close to a business district, a downtown, then it needs to be a major station. Anyways, getting on the train, you have to think, where would passengers be looking to go, right? Now, what we should do if we're trying to get a passenger who's getting into a station is give them the maximum number of opportunities for places they could travel to, right? Especially on a major station. The problem is, since this station will only serve Berry Line trains, you're immediately limiting passengers massively. If a passenger wants to, for example, go to Dundas West or the airport, something that's very reasonable from a downtown location, not possible because only the Berry Line trains will be serving the station. You also wouldn't be able to go to Milton or Mississauga City Centre in the future if that turns out to be a GO line that we could operate full-day trains on in the future. You also couldn't have, let's say, Via Rail stop there if more passenger service ever picked up. Now, some of these services are a bit more questionable, but Kitchener Line, for example, and Lakeshore West, another great example, are train lines that are super busy, and having passengers get on at Spadina without access to them massively limits the usefulness of this station. That's not to mention that, again, the Spadina streetcar connects right here, so there's a lot of potential to connect people not just at that point, but let's say up to U of T. For example, if someone is coming from the Lakeshore West, or the Milton line, or the Berry line, or the Kitchener line, 4 lines, being able to get off at Spadina and then hop on the streetcar and go up to U of T, for example, or other locations along Spadina would be, I was about to swear, I actually swore last time I recorded this, and I don't like to swear on my channel, but it would be fabulous to be able to do that, to get off the train and get straight onto the streetcar. And so the fact that we don't have service on all these lines is really problematic. Part of the problem here is that if someone wants to go to the Kitchener line or the Lakeshore line or the Milton line from this station, they would have to go all the way back to Union and then travel back west. Having to backtrack would basically negate any of the benefit of this station for any of those customers. And so what you're essentially doing is creating a station that is only for the Berry line and its customers, even though you have 4, 5, 6 rail services that are operating in the corridor that could potentially be served by the station. Another huge issue with this comes from people actually arriving at the station, not just departing. So imagine you're traveling from the eastern end of the city and you want to pass through Union and then end up at Spadina Station because, I don't know, you work at the Well or you go to U of T or something like that. And you want to choose a station that's going to land you right closer to the location you want to end up at. And Union's congested, and so people want to avoid Union, right? The problem here is that if you're coming from the east, as far as I know, Stouffville is going to be interlined with Kitchener, and Lakeshore is going to be interlined, so it's very unlikely that you'll actually be able to stay on your train and get off at Spadina. I believe Berry Line trains will very rarely be interlined, and so what you're doing is creating a station that's basically useless for people traveling from the east through Union and then getting off at that station, which, again, we're going to talk about the reasons for this and what I think this kind of shows us after, but that's problematic. And again, the same thing is true for the west. If you're traveling on the Kitchener line or the Milton line or the Lakeshore line, then the new Spadina station is totally useless to you and you're not going to get any benefit from it. What this goes to show you is that the kind of idea that, oh, if we just put a station in a location, that means it's served, is a really big fallacy. If you're not actually serving a station with rail services, you don't actually enhance connectivity. Sure, transfers work, but when you're not on a metro, transfers are still pretty painful, even at regional rail frequencies. So being able to enable one-trip rides is super, super important, and it's something that the current design for Spadina just doesn't do. It's kind of like actually looking at whether a station is serving an area is kind of the cross product of the station's location and the services it receives, right? Because if train lines going to this station don't serve places that you would want people to be able to come from or go to, then you've kind of failed in creating a station that's effective. So let me say what I think we should be building. My opinion is that Spadina should look a lot like, let's say, Southern Cross or Flinders Street in Melbourne, or some of the outer stations in German S-Bahn networks, or let's say Redfern in Sydney. I know I'm using a lot of Australian examples, but they just fit really well. Basically, when you have a lot of rail lines which converge into a central area, often these systems will have a bunch of central stations, and what that allows you to do is split up your passenger traffic. If you're forcing everyone to go into Union, which is a kind of a weird relic from our old GO Transit commuter days when downtown was literally centered around Union, you know, all the office buildings were just kind of north of Union, you know, that was where the commuter traffic made sense. But splitting up traffic along multiple stations makes way more sense because, first of all, we relieve Union, which is obviously a very important thing given the fact that the platforms are still super narrow and we don't have a current plan to fix that. As well as the fact that, you know, people might not want to go to Union and backtrack via transit or foot or cycle or whatever. And so offering stations which are closer to people's destinations where possible makes a lot of sense. So what I see a potential Spadina station looking like, and what I think would be a better model, is something kind of like what we were seeing at East Harbour. You should have platforms for every line at the station, so that the Barrie Line, Kitchener Line, Lakeshore Line, and Milton Line could all stop there, as well as potentially the Up Express. Now, to be clear, you could have a pair or two of express tracks so that services like the Up Express could variably travel to Spadina Station, but the vast majority of trains should stop there because the truth is, Toronto's downtown is growing west, as I mentioned earlier, and splitting up traffic around a couple major stations makes a lot of sense. Now, some people will be quick to mention that there is a fly-under right near that Spadina Station location, and so how could we build a station with a flyover there? Well, the truth is, we should remove the flyover. With a new S-Bahn-like operating pattern, there's really no need to have the flyover. Simply match the northern set of tracks on each side of the corridor and have operations through run. This is part of why you're seeing the new northern kind of spur up the Richmond Hill line that will be electrified, because we're, you know, matching tracks on both sides so that services can through run. So this fly-under, while kind of a little bit useful in the future, is not necessary at all. And what it does is takes up a lot of space in a valuable corridor. So I think it should be filled in. We should remove a lot of the switches and tracks. We should try to dedicate tracks as much as possible. Switches slow down your traffic, right? And have a wide station that covers all of the services. And I think this is all part of a new vision for downtown Toronto. As I mentioned before, downtown Toronto used to be kind of a point that was existing right north of Union. But downtown Toronto has grown massively, largely because of a lack of transit access throughout the region. People simply want to locate here because it's easy to get around if you're close to everything. But with all this demand in the downtown core, downtown has grown in a lot of directions. Downtown extends up north to Bloor and east and west to Spadina, and soon it will extend all the way to the Don River. And so the old model of serving all of downtown with a single station just doesn't make sense. You have to remember too that there's development on the south side of the rail corridor. South Core is massive and it's close to Union, but City Place, for example, is at Spadina, and the Portlands and some of the stuff going on the waterfront east area are much closer to East Harbour. So having downtown stations that can serve these new precincts makes a ton of sense. And it kind of reflects a more modern Toronto downtown, which is kind of growing like an inverted T, with some density kind of shooting up towards Bloor and the rest kind of coalescing around the rail corridor. Fancy words. What I think this all goes to show is that we have a very dated idea of what GO is and what regional rail needs to look like and what we should be building. And it's concerning. GO should no longer focus on having every service go to Union and having every passenger get off at Union. Having many stations downtown allows GO to benefit and allows passengers to benefit and creates a more useful system for everyone. You can see the kind of dated ideology and dated ways of thinking about operations throughout this project. For example, part of the reason that maybe we couldn't make the station bigger is that, well, the yard is right there. Using valuable downtown land to store trains is not a good idea, and you should simply operate more services further out to where layover tracks can make sense. The flyover is another example. Dated operations patterns and ways of operating commuter rail network are getting in the way of creating what should be a fantastic network for the future. Now, to be clear, what I think might happen if we build the Spadina Station in the foolish way I think we are right now is that it would kind of fail. It wouldn't be super popular, and while it would serve some people, what would end up happening is that, I don't know, in 30 years we'd realize our mistake, we'd fill in the flyover because by then it would be obvious that we don't really need it anymore, and we would make a proper Spadina Station 30 years in the future. And maybe this is the problem with the kind of multi-faceted approach we're taking with GO RER, but we should do all we can to fix these things now so that when GO RER opens it's great and not 30 years after it's been operating. And to be clear, it shouldn't stop at Spadina. We should have way more stations in our downtown core and along the rail corridor. For example, there's no reason we couldn't have a station at Cherry Street. And for example, some of these more minor stations don't need to necessarily be served by every line. Part of the benefit of having Spadina and East Harbour being served by way more stations is that imagine you had a bunch of stations in between. You could say put them all on the Lakeshore tracks, and then someone who's traveling from East Harbour to I don't know. I don't want to use the example of Cherry Street because that's a little silly, but maybe someone traveling from East Harbor to near the Rogers Center could, take the Lakeshore service, which operates with a bunch of local stations through this area. And Lakeshore could have an express service as well. But my point is that we could use the rail corridor downtown so much better, and eventually there's no reason we couldn't deck it over and build buildings on top, and that would be a great way of capturing some value from it. At the end of the day, I don't want our dogmatic and dated ways of operating the commuter railways in Toronto to kind of color how we think about the future of Toronto's regional rail. We need to start thinking about this way more, and it starts at Spadina. Thanks for watching.